This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Dorsey. I'm with the Mount Prospect Public Works Department, and this meeting is a public information meeting for the Busse Avenue and Main Street crosswalk project. This project involves the construction of a new pedestrian crossing at the intersection of Main Street and Busse Avenue in Mount Prospect. Its purpose is to improve pedestrian and bicyclist access in our downtown area. In attendance at this meeting, in addition to myself, is our Assistant Village Engineer, Matt Laurie, who will be leading our presentation. Also is our Village Engineer, Jeff Woolbecker, Deputy Director of Public Works, Jason Lieb, and our Village Manager, Mike Cassidy. With that, I'll turn things over to Matt, who will lead us through our presentation of the topic. Matt?
Thank you, Sean. What I'm going to do is briefly provide a little history on this project, share a bit about the work that would be done as part of the project, let you know a few next steps moving forward, and then turn it back over to Sean for some final comments. As Sean mentioned, this is a crosswalk improvement project at the intersection of Busse Avenue and Main Street. As you may or may not be aware, Main Street, Illinois Route 83, is actually under the jurisdiction of the Illinois Department of Transportation, or IDOT. And any work that the village wishes to do on this road must meet their approval, and we must receive a permit. We've had several requests over the years to install a sidewalk at this location. The village approached IDOT and asked if they would be willing to install a crosswalk. They indicated that they did not have any plans to do so, but would be willing to allow the village to move forward with the project as long as it meets their approval. A few years ago, the village hired an engineering consulting firm to help assist the village with developing alternatives and plans, as well as gather traffic volume, pedestrian volume. Most recently, a study was done in September of last year, and during a 4-hour period, 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, it was recorded that over 70 people crossed Main Street at this location. So there is definitely a need for a crosswalk to provide safe crossing for pedestrians at this location. The engineering consulting firm went through several alternatives with the village and with IDOT. The first one being shown here that would provide a pedestrian refuge island in the center of Route 83, but would still allow left turns from southbound 83 onto eastbound Busse Avenue, except for the morning peak hour and the afternoon peak hour. A second alternative looked at moving the crosswalk further north of the alley, but it was determined that that would be too far for pedestrians to walk out of their way and that they would still cross at the Busse Avenue intersection. A third alternative that was looked at was to install a crosswalk on the south side of the intersection. In this concept, a pedestrian refuge island would be installed again in the center of Main Street. It would occupy the northbound left turn lane. But with the recent redevelopment of the 20 West apartments, this was not chosen as a viable alternative, given that we needed to provide access into the site and did not want to eliminate left turns from northbound 83 onto westbound Busse Avenue. More recently, the village worked with IDOT to consider a crosswalk just north of the intersection that would still allow left turns from southbound 83 onto eastbound Busse Avenue. This concept, unfortunately, was recently rejected by the state in that it did not have a long enough storage bay for cars to turn left. Ultimately, the state provided direction to the village that they would indicate, or they would consider alternative number 5. With this design, the pedestrian refuge island would be in the center of Main Street to occupy the current left turn lane. The crosswalk would be on the north side of the intersection, but ultimately left turns from southbound Main Street onto eastbound Busse Avenue would be prohibited at all times. This would be the only option for the village to install a crosswalk at this location. This information was provided to the Village Board of Trustees as part of a strategic planning meeting earlier this year, and it was decided that this is a top priority for the village as part of construction in our downtown for 2020. The village decided to move forward with developing plans, and that's where we are today. Our consultant is preparing to submit final construction drawings to IDOT for their approval in the next couple of weeks. Elements of the plan would first include, as I mentioned, a pedestrian refuge island. This is a raised concrete island that would occupy the current southbound left turn lane. It would provide protection for pedestrians to cross one direction at a time. Another element of the plan would be to install pavement markings that would indicate where pedestrians can cross at the intersection, as well as signage both at and in advance of the crossing. Most notably, we would look to install overhead signs to provide a greater recognition of the crossing. It would include illuminated signs. There would be no buttons for the pedestrian to push to activate any sort of warning light. Simply at nighttime, the illuminated sign would provide greater awareness for motorists that pedestrians would be crossing at this location. Another element of the plan would include potentially reshaping the brick pavers at each of the corners. It's not our intention to relocate or shift the curb itself. The curb geometry would remain the same. However, to meet current handicap accessibility requirements for wheelchair users of the crosswalk, we may have to reshape the brick pavers to a flatter slope to allow easier crossing. Finally, an element of the plan would include the redesign of the island on the west side of the intersection. As you know, this island was installed last fall at the requirement of IDOT as part of the development for the 20 West apartments. Before this was built, the village inquired of IDOT if this could be redesigned as the village recognized potential issues with this design. Ultimately, the state rejected the village's request to redesign the island. It was installed per plan as IDOT approved it by the developer of the 20 West apartments. And since then, the village has received several complaints regarding its design. The village more recently approached IDOT, noted the complaints that we received, and they finally reluctantly agreed to consider a redesign of this island. So the village is currently working with our consultant to look at different modifications to make it easier for people to turn from Main Street onto westbound Busse Avenue. So moving forward, IDOT, as I mentioned, must still approve the plans and issue a permit for the crosswalk. This may take a few months to do, and so the village is looking for construction of this project at the earliest of 2020. But as I mentioned, it will not move forward until IDOT has approved the plans and issued a permit to the village. One other note that I'd like to make is that similar projects of crosswalk improvements are happening at other locations in the village. A project that has already received approval from IDOT and is moving towards construction this summer is at the intersection of Central Road and Emerson Street by the library. We will be improving this existing crosswalk to be a similar design as to what we're proposing here at Busse Avenue and Main Street. And then also the village is working with an engineering consulting firm to design a similar crosswalk at Central Road and Pine Street. This too is targeted for 2020, but may be deferred to 2021, depending on when IDOT will agree to the plans and issue a permit to the village. So with that, we've gone briefly over the history, told you some elements of the plan, and indicated to you next steps. If you do have any questions regarding the proposed work or even during construction later this fall, please feel free to contact the Public Works Department at the information shown on your screen. And with that, I will turn it back over to Sean for some final comments.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate the presentation. It was very thorough. One thought that came to mind is that I thought maybe we could elaborate on a little bit is some of the sidewalk ramp modifications that are necessary due to the ADA requirements, specifically like in the northwest corner, presently near the entrance to Station 34. There's a modification to the sidewalk that has to do with getting the right slopes that are required to meet current IDOT standards. Could you talk a little bit about what could be expected in that area?
Sure. Our consultant has indicated to the village that the current slopes of the northwest corner do not currently meet ADA requirements. In order to, as I mentioned, flatten the slope, this may require a railing type system right behind the ramp, and so it would approximately be 5 to 6 feet behind the curb. This would then direct people from the sidewalk and then to the south, allowing handicap users, specifically wheelchair users, to easily use this crossing. So we are working out the details, but yes, Sean, as you indicated, it may require a railing near this location to accommodate handicapped users of the crosswalk.
Okay. And then just for clarity, there's not as dramatic changes anticipated at any of the other corners, correct?
That is correct. You will not see any dramatic changes. As I mentioned, we do not anticipate having to move the curb. It would just have to be flattened out a bit, but the same shape and look of the corners would remain the same.
Okay. And there will be, although we'll have the overhead signs and pavement markings, advanced signage, and appropriate signage at the crosswalk, there will not be any rectangular rapid flash beacons or any beacon of any type installed as part of this project, correct?
That is correct. There will be no buttons for pedestrians to push. Because of its close proximity to the Northwest Highway intersection as well as the Central Road intersection, IDOT would not allow and would not issue approval for a rectangular rapid flashing beacon system at this location. We will provide some additional guidance for pedestrians to safely cross the intersection, but as you mentioned, there will not be any buttons for pedestrians to push with this new crosswalk.
Okay. Does anyone on staff have any comments or any questions at this juncture? So we'll take that as a no. I'd like to thank Matt, very nice job, and thank everyone for attending. This presentation will be posted on the village website and available through various links there, and possibly we'll post some links on our social media. I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.